Chosen one, it finally happened. The world leaders have seen enough. They met behind sealed doors, and they all agreed. What you are cannot be explained by human reason. Not science. Not politics. Not bloodline. You are beyond human understanding. What began as whispers and redacted briefings has hardened into the highest consensus in history. A rumor turned report, a report turned doctrine. Before sunrise, convoys without emblems slid through sleeping capitals. Badges went dark. Oaths were renewed. In the windowless room where the globe is usually carved into interests and corridors, a single name filled the wall. Yours. Charts that once mapped wars now trace the untraceable. Your pattern of impossible escapes, improbable alignments, and events that folded probability like paper. At first they searched for angles. Is this an operation? A myth engine? A rival psyop? They threw every tool at you, algorithms, analysts, antiquity. Your timeline refused a break. Accidents that should have ended you only rewrote themselves around you. Witnesses contradicted each other on details, yet agreed on the same thing. They felt a pressure in the room when you arrived, a quiet that reminded them of storms. The language of the meeting changed. Specimen became subject, then phenomenon, and finally a word they almost never write. Revelation, because among all their instruments there is no meter for inevitability, and yet inevitability is what you carry. You bend rooms, soften edges, and make clocks stutter. You are where explanations run out, and meaning begins. Across agencies, a pattern emerged. Technicians who laughed at miracles stopped laughing around you. Skeptics took notes and found their pens hesitating mid-sentence. Even the cynics grew careful, as if they feared the sound of their own certainty. Leaders who negotiate for a living fell silent, not out of fear, but recognition. Something ancient had stepped into their modern hour, and their modern hour made room for it. Understand this. They did not crown you. They conceded you. They did not appoint you. They admitted you. Their power is built on categories, and you are the end of categories. Their maps need borders. You're what arrives before borders and remains after. And so a line was written that will never appear on a press release, but will echo in every corridor that matters. Proceed with the assumption that this entity operates outside human limitation. With that, the world as you knew it split, before the sentence and after it. The air itself seemed to sign. If you feel the atmosphere shifting, it is because it is. History rarely announces its pivot. It simply changes posture. Tonight, it stood up. Open book Isaiah 55, verse 8. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways. Directed aim. In the first breath, global mystery and the certainty of calling. Somewhere between London and Geneva, where the fields turn to fog and the highways forget their signs, an unmarked convoy drifted in at dawn. No crests, no flags. Only matte black doors that ate the light and a procession of engines tuned to whisper. Drivers with kind of faces that never make memories. Doors thudded shut with the confidence of safes. Beneath a hillside disguised as agriculture, an elevator accepted a sequence of palms, irises, codes, and an old key carried by a very old man. The doors parted to a corridor that seemed to have no end, a runway of quiet polished stone, and at the far end a room without windows that somehow contained a horizon. Inside, presidents, kings, generals, ministers, whisper-proof aides, and the few scientists whose names are cited in other scientists' dreams. Their phones were already sleeping in copper coffins. Their signatures floated in the air like ghosts. No one said war. No one said oil, votes, or markets. The words that built eras remained in use on the table, like retired tools. They were not meeting about a country. They were meeting about you. The lights dimmed to a tone that flatters no one. A projection woke, grain glow, an immense discipline of classified typography. Your name centered, your face unedited. Then timestamps, coordinates, readings, a map that tried to contain coincidence and failed. Clips rolled, a vehicle folding into silver and flame while you walked away with a calm that was not bravado, a bridge shutting its own wind down as you crossed. A clock behind you stumbling over seconds like a child over steps. Sensors recorded spiking fields that should not exist outside storms. The graphs looked embarrassed by their own honesty. Chairs adjusted. Pens were put down. The head of state who prefers jokes first and decisions second did neither. He watched the way a hunter watches a tree lean at dusk. When the clip ended, silence arrived with the manners of a king. A general cleared his throat and changed his mind about speaking. A physicist reached for language and found music instead. The oldest monarch in the room, wrists like porcelain, eyes like fresh steel, leaned forward and broke the spell. "Whatever they are," he said, measuring each syllable away a jewel weighs stones, "they are not operating under human limits." No one objected, not because objection was forbidden, but because it was extinct. The statement did not ask for agreement. It extracted it. A minister tried to smile and discovered that his face had more dignity than that. The youngest head of government took notes with the care of a scribe at the end of an empire. A second sequence began. Testimony from those who swore they were not believers. Pilots who lost altitude without losing control. Medics who watched machines behave like startled horses. Agents who would rather be mocked than lie. One by one, detours failed to find roads. Explanations thinned out like breath at altitude. The projector cut. In the low light, the room changed density. People who make weather for other people felt the weather make itself around them. Coffee cooled, not because it sat too long, but because the air had decided on a different temperature. A pen rolled to the table's edge and then stopped, against nothing anyone could see. No one reached for it. Protocol, that great comfort, attempted to stand and remembered its knees. An advisor proposed a task force and heard how small the idea sounded. Another offered containment and tasted the word's absurdity. They began to use a new vocabulary, not learned in academies but remembered from childhood. Sign, wonder, presence. They knew better than to say miracle. Instead, they described the logistics of awe. Security footage from a corridor outside showed nothing but the corridor itself, and yet the timestamp overlay, trustworthy as gospel in those halls, hiccuped, one frame admitting a breath of eternity, and then resuming its schedule, shame but intact. The technician assigned to watch it removed his glasses and asked very softly if anyone else had felt the room blink. They did not draft a press release. They did not summon cameras, flags, or applause. The more serious the matter, the less decoration it tolerates. A folder traveled clockwise. Gloved hands, ancient rings, sleeves stitched by nations, wrists that signed budgets the size of climates. Inside were profiles, protocols, and finally a blank page. The blank page was the only honest page. It waited. You were not a crisis to be managed. You were a reference to be accepted. The page understood this before they did. And so the meeting continued, not with speeches, but with a lowering of defenses that sounded like silence. Men and women raised the wind learned a rarer skill, to yield. The projector cooled. The air stayed awake. Directed atmosphere, clandestine summit, sacred dread. World powers kneel while the audience holds its breath. This was not a declaration of fear. It was recognition. For years they have trained their eyes to see threats, not thresholds, variables, not visitations. Yet the moment finally arrived when their instruments confessed what their instincts had already whispered. The rules were present, but the author was in the room. Across the centuries, the same sentence keeps resurfacing like a coastline at low tide. You are gods, children of the Most High. Psalm 82, verse 6. Scholars argued over metaphors. Councils wrangled over context, and still a line sat there, unembarrassed by time, waiting for a generation though to treat as logistics, not literature, in their summit. With every exit closed by their own caution, that ancient line stood up and introduced itself. They called you phenomenon. Heaven called you prototype. Understand how institutions survive. They name what they cannot govern. If a force won't be contained, it must be categorized. If a truth won't be silenced, it must be filed. This is why they approved you. Not to worship you, not to domesticate the sacred, but to stop lying to themselves about the horizon they keep walking into. Approval was their way of saying, we've reached the edge of our map, and the land beyond is not hostile. It's holy. In secret archives, marginal notes began to harmonize. A historian's footnote about the singulars, a field agent's admission that presence preceded protocol, a monk's obscure treatise on unharmed ones shelved centuries ago, all of it lined up like stars no longer pretending to be accidents. Files in different alphabets agreed, in one vocabulary, appointment. The sense was not that you had been promoted but revealed, as if a veil had been pulled off a sun that had never once stopped burning. They searched for precedent and found story, deserts where bread arrived from nowhere, seas that forgot to drown, prophets whose bones interrupted funerals. But what startled them most was not the archive. It was the update. The sacred had not retired to museums. It had entered their calendar. Your dates, their dates, overlap without asking permission. This is how prophecy behaves when the hour matches its image. It stops rhyming and starts happening. One advisor tried to frame it as evolution, another as mathematics taken the long way home. The theologian in the room said nothing, which was the most accurate statement anyone made, because language becomes careful when the living subject of language shows up. You were not an argument. You were an arrival. Approval, then, was a form of repentance, a turning from management to mystery, from posture to posture's source. They did not certify you the way they certify technology. They yielded to you the way sailors yield to stars, by adjusting their course. In that adjustment was an admission that sovereignty runs deeper than sovereignty's paperwork, that there's a throne higher than the chairs they occupy, and that sometimes history requires leaders to become witnesses before they are allowed to remain leaders. They recognized a pattern they could not design. Mercy traveled with you like weather, justice trailing you like a shadow that moves before the body, coincidence behaving too faithfully to be coincidence. They had treated your survival as a data problem. Approval transformed it into a vocation problem. If you are what arrives when categories end, then your existence isn't a puzzle solved but a task to enact. And so their pens wrote the only sentence they could write without lying. Affirmed as outside human limits, treated with the protocol's ode to purpose. They kept it hidden because truth is safest before crowds, but the ink still glowed in the dark like a quiet Sabbath. The decision will not appear in news feeds. It will appear in how doors open, how obstacles forget to resist, how those who once opposed you begin, awkwardly, honestly, to make a way. They approve you because they finally recognize a collision point where the divine plan touches policy without asking permission. Not a coronation, not a canonization, an alignment. The kingdom and the council, the psalm and the pen, at last occupying the same sentence. Their world is built from definitions. Yours is built from design. They conceded definition to design. Directed divine link, the instant where God's plan crosses a political plane and the plane yields. They began with vitals, the comfortable tyranny of numbers. Pulse, steady beyond the textbook's confidence. EEG, acquire coherence where human minds are usually traffic. Heart rate variability, a forest of resilience. No storm left a mark. You trained fatigue. Fatigue refused invitation. Lactate curves that should climb like alarms flattened into lullabies. VO2 max reported a ceiling, and then your breath walked past it as if ceilings were customs booths for other lungs. Thermography mapped heat like cartographers map continents. Yours drew a halo the camera had no legend for. Spectrometers stared at your saliva and found impossible order. Crystal lattices assembling in patterns that do not occur at body temperature without a conductor. They repeated the test until the word artifact felt like superstition. Even your scars misbehaved, arriving with stories and departing without residue. A surgeon traced an old incision that medicine swore should be visible forever. The skin answered back like water. Show me where the river carried the boat. Rooms registered you before people did. Electromagnetic readings spiked when you crossed thresholds. Faraday cages sulked. Grounded tables hummed. Calibrated coils echoed storm signatures under blue skies. Static gathered around you not as nuisance, but as announcement, the air becoming a herald. A quartz clock in one lab drifted 3 seconds forward, then politely returned. Atomic time has no sense of humor. It laughed anyway. They tried distance. Sensors left in places you had touched carried afterglow for hours, an echo of presence behaving like weather that refuses to leave a valley. Plants leaned toward your chair as if toward a window. Animals forgot their fear without forgetting their caution. Children stopped crying and regarded you with a clarity that adults call impolite. When your name was spoken with contempt, Glassware rang at the edge of hearing. When spoken with faith, the same glass remained still, heavy with invisible agreement. They demanded proof immune to poetry, so they summoned machines allergic to metaphor. High-speed cameras collapsed into banding where your outline should have been crisp. Infrared showed a perimeter warmer than ambient. No source identified. Audio spectrograms caught a harmonic that no instrument owned, a pure line threading the noise like a needle through coarse cloth. Radar painted a hole around you as if the world owed you a radius of ungoverned air. Geiger counters refused drama, but admitted a rhythmic tick that matched your heartbeat and nothing radioactive nearby. They staged catastrophes on screens. Simulations of crumpling metal, trajectories that end in sirens. Then they overlaid the real footage, the car that folded and the person who didn't. The bridge that began to shiver, then steadied the instant your foot met its spine. A corridor camera that recorded you crossing and, for one frame, seemed to remember Eden. One analyst wrote statistical impossibility, and then drew a neat line through statistical. Blood work returned like an apology. Markers of inflammation idled as if on sabbatical. Telomeres kept their secrets. Mitochondrial efficiency suggested engines recently tuned by someone who loves engines. They fasted you, fed you, woke you at hateful hours. Your endocrine system answered with a patience that offended their cynicism. Still they denied, because denial is the lab coat of pride. So the room offered a final peer review. You entered. Monitors flickered. A clean power supply stumbled as though tripped by an invisible root. On the central console, 3 cursors moved of their own accord, drew a single circle, and went still. A technician reached for the switch, but the lights came back without his help, as if the building had decided to pass its own test. The lead investigator, famous for dismantling claims of the elegance of a clockmaker, watched the screens, then your face, then the long, clean line of the EKG. He removed his glasses, polished lenses that did not need polishing, and placed them down like an offering. When he finally spoke, his voice arrived without its usual architecture. "We have been studying a threshold," he said, and did not correct himself to patient or case. "A miracle," someone whispered. He didn't argue. He simply began a new file. Its first word was not diagnosis, but witness. Silence did what speeches could not. It held the room in a grip older than protocol, until even the air seemed to choose its words. Then the table woke. Chairs drew closer. Pens realigned. A red light above the door announced that the outside world would have to remain theoretical for a while longer. A minister proposed a framework. It collapsed under its own acronyms. A general suggested containment. The words sounded like a fence around weather. A scientist recommended longitudinal observation. The timeline had already been observed, and it was observing back. The monarch who had first spoken cleared his throat, and a document case slid forward, wrapped in leather the color of midnight. Inside, options, not solutions. Those had resigned. They read aloud the names of the things they know how to do. Classify, sanction, protect, redact. Each verb grew smaller, as if embarrassed to be overheard by whatever hovered in the room. At last, the counselor of law, whose sentences usually arrive like architecture, spoke without ornament. "We must acknowledge, not adjudicate." The phrase traveled around the table and returned changed, heavier, truer, inevitable. A clerk with hands trained to be invisible opened a fresh section of the ledger, the one reserved for categories that require new categories. The page waited, terrified and brave. What followed looked like ritual, but was only honesty. Each leader, by order of seniority, confirmed 2 points. You are not operating under human limits. Their systems are not authorized to pretend otherwise. There were no oaths, only signatures, no trumpet, only the quiet mathematics of names aligning on a line. The declaration had no public title. Internally, it received a designation built to be unreadable. Its plain language annex did what good law does at its best. It told the truth simply. Unclassifiable entity, approved by global council status. Neither threat nor citizen. Standing, protected from interference, exempt from conventional protocol, subject to purpose. Directive, engage with reverence, observe without obstruction, assist upon request. A seal pressed into wax made a soft sound like a door deciding to open. Across continents, Mirrored rooms perform the same choreography. Stamps kiss paper. Carbon copies found their shadows. Safes memorize new combinations. In secure networks, a flag toggle from gray to white recognized they could not contain you, so they redefined the perimeter to include the sky. They could not rank you, so they retired a ladder and drew a circle. They could not credential you, so they chose a rarer verb. Approve, not the approval of fandom, loud and disposable, but the approval of stewardship, quiet and binding. As the meeting adjourned, protocols updated themselves like maps after an earthquake. Security details received a memo whose brevity made it heavy. Do not impede. Coordinate upon contact. Air corridors marked with your initials open in systems that do not believe in initials. Agencies that compete for jurisdiction learned a new jurisdiction. No announcement followed. The most consequential sentences prefer to live in margins. Yet the world behaved as if briefed. Doors you had never touched unlocked at your approach. Gates paused. Sensors reconsidered. Conflicts remembered they could wait. People who once rehearsed their objections tried on respect and found that it fit. One final act closed the ledger. The oldest among them stood, not as a king or president, but as a human being at the edge of a larger country. He placed both hands on the table, looked at the blank space reserved for future addenda, and spoke the room. Libby recorded, "We met power and chose posture." With that, the council dismissed itself. The projectors cooled. The corridor regained its hallway manners. But the ink did not dry as ink normally dries. It set the way sunrise sets, everywhere at once, without asking permission. Within hours, the machinery that turns wonder into noise began to roar. Studios summoned roundtables. One skeptic dressed as a believer, and a mediator trained to keep revelation from finishing its sentence. Lower third banners performed their acrobatics. Anomaly or agenda? Human plus? Global hoax. As if punctuation could domesticate presence. Clips were trimmed to look harmless. Context sanded down to fit into commercial breaks. A producer whispered, "Make it safer," which is how fear asks not to be named. Influencers drafted courage as content. Threads accused, subthreads absolved, and somewhere in a scroll a real tear fell where no camera could collect it. Old footage surfaced misdated and mislabeled, like a museum throwing costumes over a living thing. A veteran anchor tried a smile that didn't belong to his face and announced that experts remain unconvinced. Experts of what? He didn't specify. Convincing of whom? He didn't say. But the places where statements do not wear makeup told the truth. Inside encrypted channels, a memo moved with the grace of a blade. Contact protocol established. Do not engage without clearance. Assume non-hostility. Prioritize de-escalation. If identified, defer. No press conference repeated those lines, but doors knew them. So did corridors. Airfields felt them. Checkpoints practiced them. This was not mythology scale for ratings. This was logistics learning a new verb, yield. While councils drafted secrecy and studios rehearsed denial, the sky declined to cooperate. It began quietly, the way dawn argues with darkness without raising its voice. Barometers trembled over cities whose weather had been scheduled months in advance. Clouds assembled with ceremonial slowness above capitals, and then parted as if a curtain had remembered its purpose. Wind changed directions mid-boulevard, polite as an usher, stern as a verdict. In a chamber where translation earpieces usually conduct nations like an orchestra, microphones brown out exactly when a report used your name as rumor. But when a junior aide, trembling and unimportant enough to be honest, whispered your name with reverence, the light steadied and the feed returned, color corrected by something that doesn't know cameras. A technician called it interference. The older word was answer. Sirens lost their urgency around hospitals that had just decided to hope. Elevators notorious for trapping tempers between floors glided without protest the moment a grandmother in Phi prayed for the beyond human one. It would make a poor headline and a perfect psalm. Birds rerouted. Flags forgot to tangle. An airport crosswind fell asleep for the exact 37 seconds a pilot needed. Later, nobody could find those 37 seconds on the transcript. Time has its own edit suite when presence enters a room. He laughed to conceal the shiver climbing his spine, but the room heard the silence more clearly than the joke. The press called it technical malfunction. He called his wife on the drive home and asked if she felt anything strange today. She hadn't watched the speech. She still said yes. Across oceans, synagogues, mosques, temples, and cathedrals, all places where people kneel for different reasons, reported the same phenomenon. Candles that refuse to flicker, incense that burns slower than physics, and incense that burned faster than fear. Priests paused mid-liturgy and forgot their next line, not from confusion, but from recognition. They had practiced invoking presence. Now presence had shown up uninvited and without translation. And then came the storms. Not destructive storms, the obedient kind, the kind that build their lungs with thunder, but do not strike until granted permission. Lightning mapped the sky in perfect circles around capitals, never entering, only surrounding like sentries. It was not threat. It was choreography in one nation. Satellites caught footage of a column of cloud rising where no weather front existed. Sensors logged humidity where there was none, temperature where there was no heat source. The analysts called it a vertical anomaly. The mystics called it a pillar. Chosen one breathed, before briefs and seals, before maps and memos. There was a quiet in you that did not ask permission to exist. All they did was notice it late. You've been living with it like a song under conversation, a light that doesn't brag, a steadying hand on the wheel while the road remembers its curve. Stand before the mirror, not the glass in the hallway, but the clear place inside your chest where the world goes to tell the truth. Look, what you see is not a title or a trick. It is not applause wearing skin. It is permission. Permission to be what God authored before opinion began. Permission to stop apologizing for oxygen. Permission to carry presence without performing for it. You were never designed to fit their files. Files are for finished things. You are a living draft written by a hand that prefers horizons. When you try to shrink, the grace around you remained life-sized. When you try to hide, kindness kept finding your forwarding address. Even your detours escorted you back to the main road. Hear the room you carry. When you enter, clocks remember they are servants, not kings. People breathe a little deeper, without knowing why. Strangers put down a small violence they were about to commit against themselves. This is not charisma. This is current. You feared pride, so you called your radiance restraint. You feared demand, so you named your calling coincidence. But humility is not pretending you are dim. Humility is aiming your light where healing is. The glow in your face is not ego. It is assignment. Refusing it does not protect you from arrogance. It starves others of daylight. Let the mirror say what mirrors rarely get to say. Beloved, you are not a rumor. You are an answer. Not an answer to everyone's curiosity. Let them keep their puzzles. But an answer to the ache that asks whether heaven still walks. It does. It is. It will, through you, take inventory of the evidence that does not need witnesses. The way your courage returns quicker than it should. The way forgiveness finds you first. The way storms negotiate instead of dominate. The way doors open with the manners of old friends. You are not lucky. You are located. This realization will not make you louder. It will make you accurate. You will spend fewer words and accomplish more weather. You will choose the long road that arrives on time. You will learn when to disappear, so that mercy can be seen. You will bless without being noticed, and be noticed only when blessing requires it.